Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for your attendance this morning. Today's webinar marks the ninth in our ongoing series of webinars, which we've been running on a wide range of topics for a diverse group of individuals across a very broad range of industries. My name is Thomas McGrath, and I'm going to go back in and just redo the mute all again, folks. Just a little bit of background noise. Apologies. So my name is Thomas McGrath. I'm acting as the MC for this webinar, which is titled DevOps Demystified. I'm an advisory manager within our consulting department, supporting and managing some of our various client engagements on behalf of Aspira. My friend and colleague Jim Blair, your presenter today, is Director of Software Development for Aspira. Jim is an IT expert and master trainer in Agile, specializing in professional Scrum master training. Jim is an Agile evangelist and has run many software projects using the Agile methodology across a broad range of industries, including IT, pharmaceutical, and the medtech sectors. Jim is a very experienced manager of software development with over 30 years utilizing a variety of development methodologies, including waterfall, agile, and variations thereof. Jim helps companies integrate development and project management frameworks, which aids them in improving their abilities to deliver value to their customers. He's also an experienced mobility architect with vast experience in the transportation and healthcare mobile solution space. Today, Jim manages a large group of software development professionals doing full stack web applications based on Linux and Microsoft infrastructure. So, given that we'll never extract all that wealth of knowledge from Jim in just one sitting, we'll start today by having Jim explain what DevOps is all about, along with outlining some of the challenges for non-co-located development and how tools like Azure DevOps delivers an integrated development environment that lessens the impacts your staff may encounter. We hope this will prove useful to those of you searching for ways to help your product teams find framework support for doing remote development effectively. So, by way of a little bit of background, for those of you who may not have heard of Aspira, we are a specialist project management consulting and IT services firm with offices in Dublin, Cork, Abu Dhabi, and Amsterdam. Established in 2007, the company now employs over 160 professional staff. And we are the only company in Ireland that is both certified by the Project Management Institute as a registered education provider and the International Institute of Business Analysis as an endorsed education provider. The company was founded with the mission statement to take the chaos out of project management, which is what we have striven to achieve in our day-to-day. So, folks, as I mentioned at the start and before we go any further, just to reiterate the fact that I placed you all on mute simply to reduce any background noise or unintended interference. So if for any reason you've come off mute, can you please just make sure that you're on mute? But despite that, we're going to ask for your comments and questions following Jim's presentation today. So please keep a note and use the Teams chat functionality to raise your questions following the demonstration, and I will monitor and raise these questions directly with Jim to discuss. And if you're new to Teams, you'll see the chat icon second from the top on the left-hand side of your Teams screen so that you can raise any questions or comments that you might have. We'll endeavour to address all of your queries. However, in the event we cannot get to all of the queries in the time allotted, given that we have a large number of attendances today, we will, of course, follow up with you directly afterwards on your specific questions, so please don't worry. Okay, so to start with, we'd like to introduce you to Mentimeter. And Jim has kindly taken us across there to Mentimeter. Mentimeter is an audience interactive solution aimed at telling us a little bit more about you, the audience, before we get started. So with that, I'm going to ask you to grab your phones now and follow the instructions on screen. So if you could please all go to www.menti.com and enter the code on screen, which is 973839 on your phone when prompted. And that'll bring you to our first question today. So our first question is, do you have an agile development capability today that is used daily by your development teams? So please enter yes if you do and you leverage that 100%. Or it might be that you do, but that you are experimenting with it and still predominantly do traditional waterfall-based projects. Or the answer may be no, that you have not yet incorporated agile techniques. So you can see there that there's a fair balance between the first two in terms of most people having leveraged the agile development capabilities within their organizations. So we know organizations must increasingly view their competency development challenges in terms of the need to be agile, and the answers to this question can be quite varied. So So I think it's fair to say there's I suppose, 2/3 majority in terms of a balance between waterfall and agile. It's creeping up now to 3/4. So, okay, thanks for that, folks. So we'll move on to the second question, which is, what agile framework are you using presently? Scrum, Kanban, some other framework, or none at all? So as most or all of you are probably aware, Agile is just an umbrella term for several different iterative and incremental software development approaches, with each of those variations being its own Agile framework. The most popular Agile frameworks include Scrum, as mentioned, and Kanban, but they also include the likes of Crystal, DSDM, which stands for Dynamic Systems Development Method, and FDD, Feature-Driven Development. So as expected, the large majority, probably the most popular Agile framework out there today is the Scrum framework, followed by Kanban, and then a variation of others. But quite a big majority as well, still not using any Agile frameworks in their day to day. Okay, interesting. All right, thanks very much, folks. So we'll move on to the third question this morning, which is, what is your biggest challenge for use of your Agile framework development? Is it finding the experience that can build and use it? Finding the tools to help you implement a process? Not understanding the framework sufficiently? Finding someone to help you on your journey? Or none? It's smooth sailing for you at the moment. So over 50% already indicating not understanding the framework sufficiently as one of the major challenges, and finding the tools to help us implement a process. So for a lot of organizations, it's still the journey down the Agile road is still fairly new. Okay, and those numbers are staying fairly static there at about 50% for not understanding the framework sufficiently. So Jim will touch a little bit more on that during the presentation later. And we'll move then on to the fourth and final question, which is, what is your basic DevOps implementation approach? Do you use an integrated solution provider such as Microsoft, Azure DevOps, or maybe you have a crafted solution using point tools like Jenkins, Jira, and others? Or is it that you don't have the tools defined for this purpose as yet? So whatever the approach or tools, the goal is to help with fulfilling tasks such as code deployment and infrastructure provisioning, amongst others. The DevOps implementation strategy is basically built on 6 basic factors, which include speed, rapid delivery, reliability, scale, improved collaboration, and security. So 60% of the audience approximately indicating use of an integrated solution provider such as Microsoft. So hopefully you'll all get a lot from today's presentation in terms of the specific demo that Jim will be touching and talking to, which is around our DevOps, Azure DevOps. Okay, that's great, folks. Thanks very much for your participation in the Mentimeter. With that, I'm going to hand you over now to Jim for today's presentation. So Jim, you're on mute there, I think.
So,
there you go.
Is that better?
That's better. We got you.
Thank you very much. Automatic mute. Okay, thank you very much, Thomas, for the lovely introduction. And before we get going, though, I just want to before I talk about the agenda, I just want to give a little bit more background and some of the reasons why I'm the one standing here talking to you about this subject today. So 30 years ago, I designed Macintosh computers in Cupertino. That's Apple's headquarters. And what was fascinating about that environment is I had always wanted to do it, but I learned a huge amount about software development working in Apple. We were organized in very small teams. So I was part of a group, the OS group, that basically our charter was to, as a small team, build the Mac OS updates that were necessary for the release of a new computer. And so we had very small teams, 6 to 8 developers was the typical development team size. And we would work in ways that were very iterative and multidisciplinary. And we didn't have managers. And when you look at the modern agile frameworks like Scrum, it's amazing to me how much our way of working overlaps with the way that Scrum works today or is defined today. So I think it's fascinating that the software development community has managed to move itself forward and start employing these techniques. And even more interesting is the fact that these tools like DevOps tools now are starting to really help organizations go through that migration towards those processes and techniques. And that's basically what we're going to talk about in today's webinar. So the webinar is broken down into basically two main parts. We're going to start off by defining what DevOps is and look at that definition in a couple of different ways. And then once we move through the definition, we'll go into a demo. We'll first talk about Microsoft Azure DevOps solution, and I'll just cover it very briefly, and then we'll walk into a demo of that their solution working. I've had a senior developer develop a sample project for us for the demo, and he's got a screen recording showing himself walking through the various solution aspects of Azure DevOps, and I think you'll find that interesting. It's really just to give you a sense of how the DevOps solution maps to the needs, as we'll talk about in part one, and then we'll finish with a wrap up. Okay, so getting going with the definition. I'm proposing a definition here. It's fairly short and high level, but we'll spend a bit of time breaking it down. So DevOps is a set of tools and processes that enable agile development organizations to deliver on their aspirations. You know, fairly high level, ambitious definition for it. But it does this, I believe, by doing focusing on a couple of influences. The first is that it enables a laser focus on the business and customer value. So when we talk about Agile, we'll see that that's a key component of being Agile in the development side anyway, and DevOps helps maintain that focus engagement for the development teams. So that's the number one. Number two is providing a short iterative value to customers and enabling it through tracking, automation, and pipelining. So critical to Agile principles or an implementation of Agile principles is the ability to get your development work out to your customers quickly and get feedback from your customers. And so being able to deliver that that turnaround, that iteration capability is a very, very difficult challenge. In fact, probably one of the biggest challenges of Agile adoption. And we'll talk about how that's done. So in tracking and automation and pipelining are key technologies that Microsoft Azure DevOps provides, but also a lot of the other third-party DevOps tools, they focus in on that area as well. We'll see how it works a little bit later on. And lastly, and critical to DevOps definition that's maybe a bit different from Agile, is the fact that it has emphasis on capturing analytics from the operations world. You know, many in the old days, many development organizations worked on development. They finished their product development. They handed it off to a support organization or an operations organization, which went out and delivered that solution to their customers. And largely they didn't hear anything of it other than you know, potentially bug reports coming back. That's no longer the world today. The world today is all about ensuring that you're capturing analytics from your customers in a way that doesn't you know, impinge on GDPR or anything like that, but it allows you to ensure that your solution is working the way that it was intended on working, and that if there's any issues with it, you can track those issues by looking at data. Most companies today, in fact, one of the most common requests we get these days is helping customers understand how to analyze their data, because they're just generating so much data. And it's largely because the tools enable the generation of data so much easier. What's driving DevOps, and why I said in the definition that it's there to support Agile, is that the Agile process is the de facto organization for product development these days. If you're not Agile, you're probably afraid that your competitiveness has been worn away, largely because, you know, Agile principles And as Thomas said, Agile is a set of principles. It's not a development framework, but the Agile principles, which are incorporated in Agile frameworks like Scrum, focus on a couple of key things. And the first is that you have to focus as a development organization on the number one customer value. The old days of doing these large, heavy feature weight releases to customers is no longer popular. What customers are doing is delivering lightweight iterations quickly to customers, getting feedback from those releases, and turning that feedback into improvements in their product. And there's many cases where that kind of thing has had a tremendous value, and I'll talk a little bit about a couple of those examples. Just talking about, or the second of these Agile drivers is the predictable and frequent updates, which ultimately elevate your competitiveness. So if you can turn around as part of your basic development process, quick changes, improvements to your product based on feedback or requests from your customers, and those needs are prioritized every couple of weeks, and so you're always delivering the most valuable thing, you're going to be more competitive. And that more competitive, as you'll see, fact will turn into a business value for you. And then the third Agile aspect is data-driven. So Agile itself has an internal feedback loop built into it. So in principle, and if you look at the detail of Scrum, you'll know that at the end of every iteration, the team is meant to look at how it's doing things and improve it. And so you're continually improving your process. But DevOps extends Agile even further to make that feedback come directly from your customers as well as just an internal thing. So it's great to have the internal feedback, which is defined in Agile, but it's even more important, and the DevOps tools are supporting the idea that you're going to get analytics from your customers, and you should be using those in your updated development. So that's the definition and kind of looking at what the driver is. Here's a view of an implementation of DevOps. And we'll start by looking at kind of the implementation workflow of Agile. In this case here, we're going to talk about Scrum. Those of you who are familiar with Agile will recognize that little sprint graphic in the top right-hand corner, the little curly arrows. That's the image that Agile development frameworks use typically to define short iteration sprints. But starting on the left-hand side of this graphic, you have what's called the product backlog. This is where the marketing organization or the product management organization prioritizes what the business needs to develop. So they define what it is, the value that the customers need in a way in the customer language. So typically you would see boards like the graphic you see there with a bunch of stickies on it, colored stickies. Often you'll see images where stickies are on the wall or teams are huddled around groups of these stickies. They're short statements of value in the customer's eyes for what the company's trying to deliver. What happens then is that's the product definition side. That gets fed into the actual development cycle through the notion of sprint planning and what's called the sprint backlog. But that is a short iteration capability in the organization where development takes that idea, what the user story is, and converts it into a working product that is delivered or potentially delivered to its customers. So everything the development or every development need in terms of quality management and completeness is all done within this development arena. And the output of that is output or product or services delivered to your customers. And that's the last of these big high-level concepts in this diagram, which is customer feedback. So your customers get your solution, they start using it. Still important today is going out and talking to your customers about their experiences. But even more important is that you can tell now, without even talking to your customers, how the customers are receiving your solutions. So as an example of that, I worked in a healthcare startup prior to joining Aspira, and we were designing an upgraded patient workflow for one of the healthcare organizations here in Cork. And we had worked with these senior nurses and senior doctors, for weeks, We had sat down with them and we mapped through their whole workflow, improvements to their workflow. We wireframed the requirements, and so we drew pictures of how the application would look, to all the detail, to every excruciating detail they could think of. And they were delighted that we had spent the time capturing that with them. And then we fed that into, that was our product definition, working with them. We fed it into our development team. My development team went off and developed it. And in the time frame, I think it took us 2 or 3 sprints to get it finished. And we started delivering that those updates to the customer. And immediately, when the solution was deployed, we started seeing behaviors in our analytics that we didn't expect. So we had a well understood workflow, and we expected the clinical staff to go from A to B to C, and we found through the data that they were struggling to go from A to B. And there was a couple of workflow elements in the application that weren't working the way that they had expected them. So, you know, naturally we phoned them up and said, we'd like to have an early day review with you. And they met us, and they were delighted with all of the improvements in the application. But right after the delighted confirmation, the buts came out. You know, we're delighted, but we didn't understand this, or we didn't understand that. So getting that feedback from your customers through data is really, really important. And you don't even necessarily need to have that feedback from your customers verbally. You can actually get it through your data analytics. Another aspect about this workflow that's very important is that product definition piece. So one of the things that Agile enables, as we talked earlier about, is the focus. And so Scrum makes the process of developing products extremely focused, you know, to the point that an iteration is so short that you cannot afford as a development team to get sidetracked by any request. And fundamentally, the process is a very short turnaround process. So at the longest time that anyone would have to wait for an emergency, quote unquote, feature concern or updated bug or anything would be the iteration time period, whatever that is. And so normally in Agile development, it's 2 weeks, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, sometimes at the most. So that's the longest a organization would take to deliver an updated feature if it was a priority. So it enables that kind of process definition, enables the team to remain focused for those 2 weeks or 3 weeks, deliver what it is they'd committed to, and then turn around and replan what the next sprint is going to be. And that focus has a huge impact. The 2 startup companies that I worked in prior to joining Aspira, both of them had severe challenges in that focus because they were both startups. They both came from a very natural way of working in the early day startup when you've got, you know, a dozen people or a few people to a dozen people working away, is that everyone in those days could come knocking on the development door and say, actually, you know, this is what we need, Jim. We need this feature done for this customer because it's going to be key to opening up our clients. And while those things are extremely important, those interruptions became so numerous that they were impossible to manage. And so my development teams were struggling to be able to deliver on their commitments. And Agile and Scrum really helps you. And so the DevOps tools now are just emphasizing that kind of support. That's the scope then. If you want to talk about how DevOps looks like in terms of an actual implementation, that's the breadth of what the tools and the processes cover. On the left-hand side, starting with the product definition, working into development, and then through to the customers, and ultimately a feedback connection back into the definition stage. And so if DevOps is successful, it's improving any of those areas, and usually all 3. In the past, or at least up until the recent past, most of the tools that are consider themselves DevOps tools were very focused on one or maybe 1 or 2 of these particular areas. Few of them covered all 3. And I think what's interesting with something like Azure DevOps is that it's a huge suite of solutions that literally does cover end to end. So you'll see in the demo, we're going to go from, Ajit is going to walk through. Ajit is my lead engineer who did the demo for me. He's going to walk through defining a product, literally showing the development of it in the demo, and then ultimately looking at the behavior of the application running in the customer's hands, as you'll see, and that's live. So then lastly, then before we get into looking at Azure DevOps in more detail, is just a quick discussion on the business impact. So primarily, if you're familiar with marketing, if you've been involved in marketing, you'll know that the concept in marketing of time to market is extremely important. You know, it's probably the number one strategic driver of early stage companies looking to establish themselves in the market, trying to get into a market or provide a solution that others haven't provided, and to get in there early, because being one or two in any market usually pays huge dividends in terms of revenue for you as an organization. And so you're hoping to get there quickly. DevOps and the underlying product development frameworks like Scrum or any of the Agile frameworks really helps product development get that time to market much quicker. And so statistically, it's proven now that looking at the statistics of startup companies that are using Agile, or even large organizations that are using Agile, they're more reactive to their market than other types of organizations are. And therefore, that reactiveness is leading to increased revenue. And so there's a direct correlation between revenue and time to market. And that's what DevOps is attempting to deliver to customers. Okay, so we've gone through the definition stages, and now we're going to get into looking at Azure DevOps in part 2 in a little bit more detail. So as I mentioned earlier, Azure DevOps is a large solution. It's you know, we would probably spend a day if we were covering it from end to end, but we're going to look at it from a very high level perspective, and we're going to try to map that those solutions and how they're organized onto the needs that we had just discussed in the DevOps definition stages and looking at the scope aspects. So we'll jump right into that. And again, I'm not going to cover every main or major component in the Azure DevOps solution, but if you were to look at it at a high level, here's 6 of the facilities that I think are at a high level offering from Azure DevOps that are really important to supporting Agile development and Agile frameworks like Scrum. The first is Azure Boards. This is where development organizations define what it is that they're building. They can put definitions, they put their user stories into Azure Boards. They can prioritize them there, and they can communicate with one another through Azure Boards. It's a communications mechanism as well. So it's the real kind of probably central solution in Azure DevOps that is used by development teams. Azure Pipelines is the stitching in between. So it's a framework that allows communication between the different solutions, lining them up in workflows, having them trigger behavior when certain events happen. And it's where you build a lot of your automation capabilities is through the likes of pipelines. Azure Repos is just world-class repositories. So no longer are Microsoft using their proprietary structures for repositories. They're using Git as the fundamental background repository, and Git is the de facto standard now in development, software development. I'm going to talk, I keep referring to software development. I'm going to talk one slide later on about the fact that what we're talking about conceptually isn't necessarily exclusive to software, but I'll cover that in a few slides from now. Moving on, then we've got Azure Test Plans. That's the whole test framework. So built into solutions, or Azure DevOps is the management of tests, development and test plans. And then artifacts is just a generic concept, looking at repositories of information about the workflows or processes that you're using. And lastly, as a highlight point, and probably one of the more really valuable pieces that is taking Azure DevOps well beyond just Agile capabilities, is the Azure Application Insights, which is the ability to get analytics from your solutions, live solutions, back into your organization. So in fact, in the demo, what you'll see is Ajit has created a solution, which is literally a website, web application that he created for the purposes of the demo. And in that web application, he's looking at some analytics of its performance, and you can see users using it. Of course, he's the user in this case in the demo, but he's using the application, his website. Then he tries to to get the website to do something that it wasn't intended on doing. Perhaps it was, somebody trying to break security of the website. And it's interesting, he can show that the detection of that behavior, which was unexpected and unwarranted, appears in the through the application insights, so that he can detect that the issues are going on. And the fact that they can tie in that kind of capability into their solution offering just makes it so much easier for small organizations to start building this capability into their own products. So how do they map again? So critical to understand how those solutions, it's nice to have their icons and the solutions, but how do they map into the needs that we had talked about earlier? So if we remind ourselves of the three key aspects of Agile type development, product definition, development, and feedback in that loop, then roughly how they map is the definitions. Product definition is supported mostly by the Azure boards, not only, but that's probably the primary solution used in that case. The development area uses everything in the solution space, everything possible potentially, and most organizations, including even the simple demo that we're doing, we use the majority of those solutions in that demo. And then for the feedback, importantly, again, it's this application insights, the ability to enable you to reach out to your working solution and capture the data and bring it back into your organization through the pipelines capability and triggers. So in this case, I think in the demo, he gets a trigger that something has gone wrong with a user's approach to the application, and he can see that then in the data. One last aspect of the DevOps before we get into the demo piece is that it's not a closed solution. So importantly, Microsoft built their platform, and it is a platform type development. So it's built with the expectation that third-party integration is going to be there. And in fact, in the demo, one of the testing that's done inside the demo, although I don't think you see it actually in the demo recording, the testing that we built into it is actually based on Selenium as a test framework, as a test application. And the pipelines tie Selenium back into the workflow for the development process for Ajit. So he's incorporating world-class external solutions, third-party solutions, and it was intended on that way. So if you have an existing solution space, if you're an organization that spent a lot of time or invested something in your own workflow development or DevOps development, you can easily incorporate that work into the Azure DevOps if you're interested, or vice versa, I suppose. Could be the same. So I did say that I would just talk about this just very briefly. What we're talking about, Agile as a concept and the Agile specific frameworks like Scrum, as Thomas said, and there's others. There's something like 40 different Agile frameworks that are used for defining product development. Those frameworks are not software specific. So I get a lot of questions. I teach the Scrum certification course for Aspira, and I get a lot of attendees in my course that are not in software development. They're working in manufacturing industry and other industries, and they're interested in trying to figure out how Agile principles can be applied to their own organization and how they do things. And the reality is you can apply these techniques and concepts very easily into non-software related worlds. So keep that in mind. And in particular, as Aspira has a lot of experience in project management and business analysis and other types of professions where we focused in on other industries other than software. So I run the software organization, but I've got a lot of colleagues that are working on other areas, and we can consult and work with you on building Agile capabilities into your existing businesses quite easily. So that's something to keep in mind towards the end of this, or if you're looking for some questions with us or discussions with us beyond the webinar. So here we go. We're going to go into a quick demo. The demo is effectively what my lead engineer, Ajit, has done is that he started by going from the very beginning. He developed a set of user stories that defined what his application was going to do, or what its value was to its users. It's a very simple web application. it launches a website, or a website launches the application, and it shows a nice, lovely graphic of Aspira and DevOps, and it has a few menus. But importantly, it's got a few triggers in it so that we can get some analytics from it, and that's what you see at the very end of the demo. So enjoy the demo. It's short, and it just covers the various solutions, those highlight solutions that I covered. You should see those actually in action here.
Jeet is logging into the Azure DevOps Cloud instance here in the video. Azure DevOps is offered as both a cloud service or an on-premise service. Microsoft has all the details of the licensing of Azure in either form up on their Azure DevOps website. Ajit has created a sample Azure DevOps project for our demo, and it's called the DevOps webinar. When he opens up the project window, you can see the DevOps feature navigation on the left side of the screen and the project statistics on the right side of the screen. Once we're looking at the backlog, we are shown the complete repository of user stories and feature descriptions for the product under development. As we saw in the DevOps scope slide, the backlog contains all the functionality that is planned for the project. The right side of the window shows the sprint road mapping area, and that's where the product owner and the development team can sketch out the high-level release planning. The product owner and the development team can view the backlog as a feature list, thereby removing the noise of all the other backlog items. They can then expand any given feature for more detail if they choose. The product owner and the development team can then use the right side of the screen that enables sprint road mapping to plan the delivery of features through their sprint iterations. Here, Ajit expands a backlog feature to show the constituent user stories and tasks. Ajit moves within Azure DevOps to the sprint view configuration, which does a good job in resembling the Scrum framework ideas. Here he has switched to the backlog view while still in the sprint mode, where he continues working on his sprint planning. Microsoft has put in effort within DevOps to be Agile framework agnostic. While DevOps supports Scrum's official guide, it remains flexible enough to support companies that aren't 100% aligned to the Scrum guide. Ajit enters the detailed sprint activity management area of Azure DevOps. This is the area development teams would use to manage their in-sprint work. Every day in their stand-up, the team reviews this board and updates all the items. This keeps the tracking accurate down to the day. Finally, Ajit moves to the overview dashboards that development teams would use to track their high-level project progress. Reports can be easily added to this dashboard so the teams can track the items that they want to.
Here, Ajit is about to configure a pipeline. He surveys the options available, then enables a continuous monitoring pipeline using application insights. He then demonstrates that the live analytics can capture a user trying to access a location that doesn't exist on our server. And then going back to the dashboard, he finds the intrusion or the user error that has been captured by insights and our pipeline. We're only reaching the tip of the iceberg when we're looking at the true power of this level of analytics integration. Okay, so apologies for the very end of that. It moved very quickly. What you saw, if you were trying to keep up with it, is that he had created the web application and then he was surveying the analytics as they were coming in from the solution. But then he went back to the application and he specifically, as say somebody like a hacker would try, he tried to put in a URL manually and see if the application would respond. And when he came back to the Azure DevOps analytics page or the dashboard, he saw that there was exceptions. Somebody was trying to access a certain location that wasn't defined in the application, and then presumably he could investigate that. All right, so we're in the wrap-up phase of the presentation. Just wanted to cover again, just at a high level, that in the middle graphic there is the typical Scrum iteration image, and The Azure DevOps solutions are all about supporting that. So we said in the definition that it's a support tools and processes to support Agile development. And indeed, in this case here, we've shown it supporting Scrum, but it does support other types of software development frameworks, but as well other types of capability or other types of development that are not necessarily software. So what did we learn today? And that's a picture of my neighbor's cat, I think, is that we define DevOps and through the various aspects at the very beginning, but most importantly, we saw that that DevOps solutions are real accelerators for Agile-based development. So if you're doing Agile development or you want to start doing Agile development, what you're looking for is a set of tools that enable that process easier than by doing it by hand. There still are loads of organizations out there in the world that are doing their own DevOps development. They're defining their own pipelines and their own tools. There's some very, very good tools out there that exist, and DevOps Microsoft solution is not going to stop those uses. But I think it's critical for organizations that really can't afford to get to that level of investment. And it is a true accelerator when you can easily build applications. Ajit built that demo application probably in the space of 6 to 8 hours in total, where from scratch he started, built an application, deployed it out to a working Azure server up in the cloud, and started pulling analytics from it all within 8 hours of work. And so when you can get that kind of capability as a proof of concept, it truly is powerful. And of course, we as a company are there to support you. If you're looking for specifically help in your software development, then it's me that you're going to be talking to probably, or my team. And if you're looking for support and you're not in software, then we have a huge array of professionals that can help you in that area as well. So knock on our door if you're interested for any help in any business that you're in. I'd just like to end by thanking you guys for sitting and listening to the webinar today. I want to thank Thomas McGrath and Neve Lina, who without those two, I wouldn't have been able to be talking about this webinar today. Tremendous amount of support from them. And of course, my developer, Ajit Singh, who developed the demo for us and that we watched in the demo today. And then lastly, all my colleagues in Aspira, Damien Kearns, who is the kind of the king of the webinar program, and all of the colleagues that have helped in that whole process. So thank you very much to everyone there. To end then, we're going to offer, we've got a free offer where we offer you the option of having a quick assessment service for your DevOps development. If you're either looking at planning some DevOps implementation, or you have an existing Agile capability and you're looking for some help in determining how you can move forward or dealing with specific issues, then we're there to help you, and we're offering a free assessment if you're interested. And you can contact us through the email address that's on the screen there, and using the code that's also on this slide. I think these slides will be posted up on our website, and so you can view this presentation afterwards as well. And that's it. I'll hand over now to Thomas to go back to my MC, and he'll finish off the day for you. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jim. Excellent presentation. And I have a couple of questions from the audience, Jim, if you don't mind.
Okay.
You grab a quick sip of water there, while I'm reading the first question. I'll read it slow to give you a chance to catch your breath. You've covered a lot of really good information there. So first question in is from Magda, and the question to you, Jim, is would you recommend DevOps for an implementation with 3-month or longer turnaround?
Would I recommend DevOps for an implementation that has a
3-month or longer turnaround? Yes.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. The DevOps is not, conceptually, there's nothing in DevOps that actually is related to any of the Agile calls these iterations time boxing. And so if you have a sprint that's time boxed at 2 weeks, if you've decided that you want your iteration to be every 2 weeks, you can either do one of two things. One is you can develop using agile concepts and short iterations every 2 weeks, and then you can release your product to your customer in the 3-month cycles. Very importantly, even though agile enables you to deliver updates to your product every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. In fact, in some cases, believe it or not, there are organizations out there that are doing sprints, iterations every week. And I've heard of the absurd of taking it down to 1 day, but the norm is 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But it's very common for enterprise organizations not to be releasing their product to their customer every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, just because their customer can't usually accept that kind of frequency for updates. So you negotiate with your customer what the ideal upgrade frequency is. And so if it happens to be 3 months, you can either support that by doing sprints and lots of different sprints, accumulating the value and then doing a formal release to your customer every 3 months, or the techniques that are used in DevOps tools are applicable to something that's defined to be 3 months long. 3 months wouldn't be considered agile in that term, but there's lots of customers that we have that are doing bits of agile and bits of waterfall together. And so if that's what you have arranged, then it's perfectly fine. There's nothing in the tools that would prevent you from doing that.
Okay, thanks, Jim. A couple of more questions, Jim. Before I get on to that second question, I'm just going to mention to the audience that if you want to start completing the short survey form that we have, you can use the camera app on your phone to scan the QR code on screen, and that'll bring you to the short feedback form that we have that should only take you less than a minute to complete. So we'd really appreciate you populating that feedback form for us before you leave the webinar today. So Jim, the second question that I have from the audience is from Maria. And Maria's question is, how would you apply Agile to business intelligence projects? Would you have any guidelines on that front?
Very good question, Maria. I mean, I think without knowing too much detail about it, I'm not a business intelligence expert myself, but without knowing some of the background, I would say that the application insights, the ability to get analytics from solutions that are running in your customer's premises can be extended to other, not necessarily applications that you're delivering. They could be things that you're building to pull in data and feedback from your users in a much more dynamic way. So potentially something like that could be arranged, combining pipelining in Azure DevOps with application insights. You could arrange a lot of solutions where you were pulling information from your customers' workflows that enabled you to help them understand how to improve things, if that's what the question is. I hope I'm responding in the way that it is, and if not, then certainly I'd be welcome a discussion about it afterwards.
Great, thanks, Jim. Final question, Jim, I think that we have this morning is from Stephen. So the question is, Jim, what would you say is the biggest change that Azure DevOps brings or offers that didn't already exist?
Right, good question, Stephen. And so I think what I think is impressive about Azure DevOps is the breadth of the scope that it provides. So we covered that in one of the slides. Literally from end to end, if you look at Agile software development, it goes from end to end from the definition side. That's the full scope of development in most organizations. And the fact that the one vendor provides solutions that are very tightly knitted together and enables full end-to-end support. I mean, it's conceivable that you wouldn't have to employ any third-party tools to be able to complete a agile software development process in your organization, just using the tools from Microsoft. And of course, they have very flexible licensing as well. So I think that's what's impressive about it, and the fact that they've kept support by allowing third-party organizations. If I was to answer it in a slightly different way, though, I would say that the one thing that all of these tools, whether it's Microsoft Azure DevOps or any of the other DevOps tools, that's absolutely critical for the implementation of Agile in your organization, it's automation. And I didn't beat on it too much in the webinar, but automation is the biggest challenge, I believe, in getting to become an Agile compliant organization. And by compliant, I mean the ability to turn around product updates in a 2-week cycle If you don't have automation, you don't have a hope in getting towards that kind of capability. But when you do build it, it's phenomenal what it can do to your organization in terms of when you can reliably turn around your product and bring feature development to a customer in a 2-week cycle. You have just changed the game completely in their eyes. And I've seen customers unbelievably responses to that kind of capability. So I hope that answers it as well.
Sounds like a case of build it and they will come, Jim.
Yeah, no, it's build it, give it to them, and then watch what they do, and then figure out how to rebuild it in a better way. And that's how the Agile world works today.
Great. Thanks very much, Jim. That's all the questions we have. So I'm going to wrap us up there, folks, and say thanks again very much for your participation today.